This is about defending democracy. This is no longer Democrats versus Republicans. What do you want your kids to believe in? There must be give and take.
This is White Flag with Joe Walsh.
Hey, White Flag with Joe Walsh, former Congressman Joe Walsh here. Excited for this conversation because it's all I'm thinking about these days, and it's a hell of a lot of what my guest is thinking about these days. It's a hell of a lot everybody's thinking about. Jim Keady, a New Jersey boy, former local official in Asbury Park. He's an activist, longtime educator, politician, run for Congress a couple times. Would love to see him run again. He and I disagree on damn near everything, but I'd love to see a guy like him in Congress. You may know Jim, Mr. New Jersey, because he's the guy, what year, Jim, was it, who stood up and got in Christie's face, and Christie said, sit down and shut up.
2014. It was the second anniversary of Hurricane Sandy, and Governor Christie was using my hometown of Belmar as a prop to say what a great job he had been doing getting our state cleaned up and rebuilt, and he'd been an abject failure. I mean, we had 10,000 families that were still out of their homes 2 years out. We had him out of the state at that point, 175 days that year, because he was chasing his failed presidential ambitions.
Chris Christie.
And, we had a lot of work to do here.
We, and Jim and I, for everybody listening to us, and Jim, I've got people from far right to far left and everybody in between. Keady and I disagree on probably almost everything, most things. We've become friends. We both don't like Chris Christie, but we both really respect each other and are sick of both political parties. And we do share some things in common. I wanted to have you on, young man, because you did it respectfully, and I appreciate that. This Israel, what's going on in the Middle East right now is hard. And it's tough. And you respectfully got in my grill a week or so ago and challenged me on the way I'm looking and thinking about this. And I wanted to bring you on. I wanted you to explain, and I wanted to have a conversation with you about it. You and I are both a couple of Catholic boys. So I want to start like this, Jim. October 7th happens. What should Israel have done?
Sure. Before we get into the specifics, I want to do this because I feel like on so many issues, and this is the hot button issue right now, right?
Right, definitely.
You've got people that are so calcified and so dug into their camps that we're not listening to each other. So when I was meditating and praying on this about coming on with you today, I came up with 3 points that I hope we could agree on to start the conversation.
Good.
With, right?
Good. Take it away.
Number one, you and I are not going to solve this today, right? If you and I could solve this issue with Israel and Palestine, we wouldn't be talking to each other here on your podcast. We would be on every major network. We would be in some room somewhere in D.C. or in Europe hashing this out, right?
Amen.
And I think that's important for everybody to realize. This is not going to get sorted out in a day. It's decades in the making.
And by the way, let me just add, Jim, and that's a great point, and then I want you to continue. People will find this out as they listen to us. You and I fairly strongly disagree on that region of the world, and I think it's so important that you and I can sit down and have a conversation about it. Continue.
Agreed. All right, number two, I hope that our goal isn't to win a debate. Like, we're not doing this for the spectators and, scoring points. It's about having an honest conversation, creating some understanding, and hoping to find, through the disagreements, some points of commonality, common ground that could then be built on. Because I think that has to be modeled for people.
And Jimmy, let me say this. I don't do debates. So spot on. I just do conversations. Perfect.
All right. Third is that we accept that each of us doesn't know everything about this subject. Right, in terms of the history, the current dynamics of the conflict, and that we're not looking for, like, it irks me so much when I hear people say, like, well, did you know about blah, blah, blah? Do you know who the prime minister was 3 decades ago? No, but you know what? Like, if you look behind me, I've got a library. I could probably look it up, and I've got the incredible encyclopedia of Google. So let's not gotcha each other on facts.
We are not Jim, that's so spot on. We are not experts, and this is not a debate. And in fact, I love your lead 3 points. Thank you for that. And it's made me adjust my first question to start our conversation. As you and I sit here today and you look at what's going on in that part of the world right now, what does it do to you? How does it make you feel?
Yeah, that was the next, and this wasn't. So those were the 3 points, and then the next
Love
one
it.
for me was similar to what you're saying. Like, what do we bring into the table,
Yeah.
right? Why is it that we care, right? What's informing our understanding of the issues here? So for me, things that inform me on this particular issue, one, I'm academically trained as a theologian,
Yeah.
right? So I've got a graduate degree with distinction in theology from St. John's University, focusing on what's called pastoral theology and also social ethics. So this is, right in my wheelhouse for stuff that I've been academically studying
Yeah.
for the last 26 years of my life, right?
Yeah. Cool.
As someone who, prior to taking over my family's tavern, when my father passed away 11 years ago, and I still got the tequila waiting for you when you get to drink it, I did international human rights work for 15
Yeah.
years full time.
That's important
So
for people to know.
and I did my labor rights work that I did for 15 years was in the largest Muslim country in the world, in Indonesia. It's also the most moderate. And that's why I've talked about, and we may get into this, like I see Indonesia as a potential broker in these situations because of the size, because of the religious tradition, and because of their moderation. Generally speaking, since the political reformasi in 1998, it's an emerging democracy. It's a fascinating place. I also, my faith, as you mentioned, we're both Catholics. I grew up, I went to Catholic school for 18 years. I was a
Yeah.
high school religion teacher at three different high schools. And for me, the core of my faith is love and seeking peace. And if we want to have peace, two of the key components to peace are liberation and justice, right? And what does love demand in a situation like this? And really being in a position, I think, because we're not so emotionally attached to it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
We can step back a little bit and say, oh, guys, hang on a second, right? Let's really take a look at this. So I think the question you asked at the outset, like,
We
hey,
don't.
October
Yeah.
7th happens, what would you do? Right? What I want to do with it
Or
before
what
we
was?
get in,
Go ahead. Go ahead. No, go ahead, Jim.
well,
Continue.
before we get into the answering of that, like I was thinking about this. Well, look, I ran for Congress. You served in Congress.
Yeah.
I'd like to get there at some point because I think I bring a valuable voice and ideas to the table. I don't know if
Yeah.
that's something you're interested in trying to get back there. But I was thinking of this. Well, if Joe and I were both in Congress right now,
Yeah. Exactly.
and we had to sit in a room, right? And your first question you throw on the table is, hey, what's the course of action post October 7th?
Yeah.
The questions that I threw out on my list, and these are in no particular order. I was just scribbling notes before I got on with you, right?
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Like, how does the bombing of children and civilians in Palestine, particularly if we look at the refugee camp that was just hit twice in the last 48 hours, how does that keep Israel secure? Does it? Right?
All right, I'm okay. I'm going to call timeout, and I love you. I love you. I love you. But if either one of us filibusters, we can slap the other one on top of the head. Back up for me with me for a moment. Give me a very brief labeling of how you would label yourself politically. I call myself a free market libertarian kind of a guy. That's generally what I am. When you describe yourself politically, what are you?
I would say a progressive pragmatist.
Fair.
Right? I absolutely want to see progress. I am willing in rhetoric and example to put the flag way out here where I want it to be, and also recognize with 25 years of experience of grassroots activism that it takes a while to get to that.
So
flag.
for some context, Jimmy, if you were in Congress right now, in the Democratic caucus, you've got centrist moderate Democrats and you've got AOC and folks on the left, where would you fit broadly speaking, on the Democratic side?
I really try. Well, first, I would love to be in there as an independent, right? So that would be the
Ugh.
first thing.
I'd love to see that too.
Yeah. So I loved when I ran and served proudly in office in the city of Asbury Park. It's a nonpartisan city. So when you run for office, I don't have to carry anybody's baggage. This is me. I'm Jim Keady. Here are the 5 things I'm running on. Here's the
Right.
stuff that I've done before this
Right.
that I believe will inform and gives me the experience to fight for these 5 things that I'm going to go to City Hall and fight for.
Sounds
So,
great. Sounds swell. Sounds
yeah,
wonderful. But really, as you and I have talked about,
political
damn tough.
reality.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Damn tough to do. Okay, so let's look at what's going on in the Middle East. Broadly speaking, before we get into specifics, your head and your heart right now, 3 weeks and some change in, what does this situation do to you? How does it make you feel with what's going on right now? Let's start
Yeah,
there.
I mean, one, I'm deeply concerned for the mental and physical health of everybody involved in that conflict and the people who are attached to it because of their either ethnic or religious backgrounds. Right? I live in the congressional 4th district. I used to be in the New Jersey legislative 30th. I just got redistricted out of
Okay.
that.
Yeah.
In the 30th and in the 4th sits Lakewood, New Jersey. Lakewood is home to one of the largest Jewish populations outside of Israel. Right? I mean, one of the most significant synagogues outside of Israel, BMG, is in Lakewood, New Jersey. So when I first ran for state assembly back in 2015, I had people. I was asked by the Democrat. I was an independent at the time. I was
Yeah.
asked by the Democratic Party to run on the Democratic banner, and I agreed, saying I will maintain my independence. Thank you, but yes, I'll run under your team's banner. And the people who wanted to help me were saying, look, you've got to get to Lakewood. You need to meet with the Jewish caucus
Yeah.
to learn as much as you can. So
Right.
that was, for me, it was, God, going into the Jerusalem 2 pizza shop in Lakewood and just sitting there and listening, right? And talking to other business owners in the town and going to town meetings and going to zoning board meetings and planning board meetings. And now I know, God, that people in the Jewish community, and that's the Orthodox community, there's
Yeah.
other
Yeah. Yeah.
other Jewish groups in this area. And man, a lot of them are terrified, right? So my concern for them, and if you go up to Paterson, New Jersey, massive Palestinian population,
Yeah.
equally terrified and angry and frustrated. So I think for people like us, we have a real opportunity to try and be a calming influence.
Right, right, right. And see, this is why I love you and you frustrate me, but you frustrate me lovingly. I hear all that, and you and I share that. War sucks, and innocent people always pay a price in war. And you and I feel compassion for and mourn every civilian on every side of this thing being impacted. But we need to balance that with, okay, but real fucking world, what happens? October 7th happened. Israel has to respond. And kind of the rubber hits the road. So drill down on that with me, Mr. Love and Compassion. And I mean that with
Yeah.
all sincerity. You're Israel
Oh, I
and
know.
you're hit. You're hit like that on October 7th. What the heck do you do?
Yeah.
And
So
you know where I am on
I
this.
tried it. Yeah. So I try to draw on the experience of September 11th. Right? I live an hour south of New York City. There's a guy, Mike Lynch, who Mike was 5 years older than me. This monster basketball player that went to St. Rose High School that I grew up. Those guys that are there when
Oh,
you're in
yeah.
grammar school and you're just looking up to them like they're gods. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mike was on the 107th floor with Kenneth
Yeah.
Fitzgerald. I had guys that I grew up with and went to high school with who were running for their lives down the street. I volunteered down at St. Paul's and went to the pit and saw that devastation and destruction and the anger and the pain, right? You could feel it in the air, and I felt it, right? So so my guess is there were similar feelings in Israel on October 7th. And
those
it's a
feelings, those
dangerous.
feelings aren't bad.
No, totally understandable,
Evil comes to your
justified.
doorstep, right?
Yeah. So it's also a very dangerous emotional space to be in to make really critical tactical decisions. And we made some horrible ones. Like I remember when when September 11th happened, and I look, when I was 21 years old, I
Yeah,
took off. I backpacked around the world. I had my
yeah.
blinders taken off at a young age relative to other people that I grew up with. I am a constant student of international relations and economics and politics and social issues. So when we got hit on September 11th, and a lot of people were saying, "Why do they hate us?" I knew, right? Because I was aware of the issues. So if we look at October 7th, it can't just be because they're evil. That's naive,
Well, but okay,
right? There's a
stop.
history to this.
Right. But let me stop you there, my friend. And that's a really good nuanced point you made. Thank you for making it. But I want you to agree with me, unless you don't. Hamas, a terrorist organization, justified, understood, rationalized what they did that day on October 7th. You would agree with me that act was an evil act, yay or nay? Evil.
Absolutely needs to be condemned.
You are such a, don't be a New Jersey, actually, New Jersey politicians are straight talking.
No, I mean,
Yes, condemned, but what they did that day, James Keady, was that evil?
the actions, absolutely, when you look at the targeting of civilians, the way they targeted civilians, the way they desecrated
Butchered,
bodies.
tortured, yeah.
Yes.
So that was an
Yes,
evil
absolutely.
act.
No debate on that.
Okay,
Between
so
you and I. Others might, but between you and I, no debate on that.
would you expand it, my theologian friend, that any decent human being of any color or creed looking at that act would say that's evil?
I think that's absolutely fair. Yes. And what I want us to do
Go ahead.
is to look at, and this is where, in my bunch of questions, if you and I were sitting in a room in Washington D.C. and we're on some committee that has to figure out, hey, how do we address this? How does the history of the dynamics, how do the historical dynamics inform this current moment that produced evil on October 7th?
Yeah.
Right? Like, this didn't happen in a vacuum. Right? What the original Zionist project in the early 1900s, the Balfour Declaration in 1917, the establishment of Israel in 48, going through to the, along with that, Jordan and Egypt managing the Palestinian territories from 48 to 67. Where does the PLO fit in? Where does Hamas fit in? The Oslo Accords, the Six-Day War in 67. All of this stuff, right? Again, it doesn't happen in a vacuum, and I think it's just really dangerous for us to isolate one moment if we have to ask the question, what is our end game? And the end game for me, in a broad philosophical sense, is peace. And peace comes about through justice and liberation. What does that look like? What does it look like for Israel? What does it look like for Palestine? And how do we get there? And is the course of action that Israel's taking right now, because I equally believe that the killing of more than 3,000 children is evil. And that's being done with weapons and money that were provided by you and I as American taxpayers.
Okay, let me stop you for a
Right?
second.
And
Let me
I'm
stop
asking,
you. Yeah.
Yep.
Let me stop you for a sec. You've gone down an interesting road, and I appreciate it. No, October 7th, and I acknowledge that to you, my friend, did not happen in a vacuum. You and I have agreed that what happened that day was evil, and I agree with you, it did not happen in a vacuum. And you're articulating the history of the region that you and I know well. I think not to, but correct me if I'm wrong, Jim, not to justify what Hamas did on October 7th, but for people to understand why they might have done what they did on October 7th. Is that fair? Like, you're not using the history to justify what they did.
No,
just to understand
and this
what
is,
they did.
I have to, I'm always educating, right? At my heart, I'm a teacher. I love teaching. I love education. I love when I used to be in the classroom, when I used to lecture all over the United States. And the way that I try to explain it to people, because people do get very defensive quickly. Are you justifying what they did? No. Right? So if I looked at a serial killer and I was trying to understand, God, how did they get to that point? Like, take Jeffrey Dahmer as an example.
Yeah.
Right? How do you get to the point where you're murdering and eating people? Well, why would I want to understand that? Well, we want to understand it because we want to look out in the general population. And if anybody else is kind of hitting the markers in terms of development, emotional development or devolving emotionally, then yeah, we want to intervene. Right before they get to the point where they become a serial killer.
Boom. Thank you,
so,
my educator.
We need to understand.
Yeah, good. I'm glad you made that. I'm glad you made that distinction, my educator. Thank you. It's not a justification. We need to understand. And then, and Jim, help me with this. And so, but it happens, and 1,400 Israelis are butchered, tortured, slaughtered, all the rest. And you make great points that there are profound issues at play in this region, but Israel was hit. Israel has to respond, yes or no? Militarily, yes or no?
Yes, and for me, the guiding questions would be, right? Because I look, the guiding questions would be, is it proportional? Because if it's disproportional, it's potentially a war crime. How do we protect civilians, non-combatants, as they do what they want to do? Are they hitting them for purely tactical reasons to reach their end goal? Or is it revenge-based, right? Is it, hey, we want to get to a number that we think equals the value of those 1,400 Israeli citizens that were Israelis and foreign nationals as well, because there were some of those
and Arabs
who were killed, right? And Arabs, right? And I would want to sit down with again, if you and I are in Congress and know the access you have to individuals and documents and experts, right? I would want to sit down with like some men and women from special forces and say, okay, if this was us. And we wanted to we wanted to get Hamas. We wanted to bring certain people from Hamas in alive so they can be brought to justice in the International Criminal Court, or they're too much of a threat and they need to be killed, or they're because they're going to kill a lot of other people. What's the best tactical approach to that? I have a hard time believing that carpet bombing,
well, they're not carpet
dropping
bombing,
more
Jim.
munitions in terms of the firepower are almost equal to what we dropped on Hiroshima, right? Over the last 3 weeks, that much tonnage of weaponry has been dropped. I have a hard time believing that's tactically the best approach to help Israel be secure, have its border secure, both in the short run and my greater concern is in the long run.
Israel has made clear to the world what their end game is, their goal is. I don't know how well they've thought beyond the first goal, but their goal, Jim, is status quo ain't staying. They're going to get rid of Hamas. Hamas will no longer rule Gaza. Hamas is going to be gone. Now, you may disagree with that goal, but if that's their goal, it's hard to do without a major military operation.
So,
and by the way, Jim, can I back up? Can I back up for a moment?
Yeah.
Because I want to ask you this question. Maybe you disagree with this. So the government of Israel's neighbor, the government of Gaza, is Hamas. Hamas is evil. It's a terrorist organization. They need to go. I agree with that. Do you agree with that? Like, do you think Hamas should be kaput, gone, no
So
longer?
yeah, so one of the guys that's really influenced my
Yeah,
thinking on this, and I think
yeah,
I may have shared this book with you. It's the Iron Wall
it's a good
by
book.
Avi Shlaim.
Yeah,
Right, Avi's written a dozen books. He's an expert on the region, and he really I just watched an interview that he did, and he really parses this out. And this is a Jewish guy, right?
yeah.
He's a Jewish Iraqi or Iraqi Jew. I guess I'm not sure which one comes first. And he said, you have the governing body of Hamas, and then you have the military wing, right? And he was really trying to parse these two out. And if you think about it, I mean, it does make some sense if you just think of government, even in a small town, right? You've got the elected officials, you've got the town administrator, you got the garbage men and women, you've got other public works, you've got the zoning people,
And
and
Hamas
you've
kind of
got
controls
in
it
the
all.
town, you've got the police force,
Hamas controls
right?
it all.
And then when you broaden it out to the federal level, think about all of the different aspects of governing that you did as a member
Yeah.
of Congress, and you've got the military branch, right? So, this is where I am
You
asking the question again. I'm not saying I have the answer to it, but are we looking at, Hamas's military wing is about 40,000 soldiers.
yeah,
Are we talking about killing all 40,000 people?
possibly.
Right? Hamas's leadership, like the person who's in charge of the water plant, right? And you may have someone who's like a member of Hamas who's in charge of the sewage system.
Well,
and the water plant.
I guess, Jim, I'd ask the question this way: do you think Hamas should be the ruling regime of Gaza? I would say no.
Well,
They're a terrorist
I
organization
think that has to be left up
to the
Joe,
Palestinian people.
In, if we believe in representative democracy, now 16 years ago they got voted in. I'm not saying that was good, right?
Haven't had
And I
an
think
election since.
There probably should have been an election after that, right?
Yeah.
So I would be strongly critical of them in holding that power for as long as they did. But this is where it comes back to asking those historical questions, right? Well, why did Netanyahu think that Hamas was the group to back? Because Netanyahu helped to create Hamas.
Agreed.
Because he didn't want to deal with
Agreed.
the Palestinian Liberation Organization.
Well,
right?
and
So
Netanyahu
what
knew.
responsibility?
Yeah. Netanyahu,
Yeah,
Jim,
like, what
as you know,
responsibility does he have in this?
yeah, he knew how bad and evil and radicalized Hamas was. So he figured if they were ruling, the whole impetus for a two-state solution, nobody'd want it because nobody's going to deal with these crazy terrorists.
Yep.
Agreed. I agree with all
And
of
that's,
that.
when we
But
and we look at Likud, right? Netanyahu, the leader of the Likud party, like they are Jewish nationalists, right? And within the Knesset, there's, I believe, 15 parties currently. Like, it's not here where it's Republicans and Democrats, right? You've got 15 groups that have this, they've formed a government and they argue and try and hash things out. Now, Likud has held on to power in the significant recent past.
You do not.
Are they? Go ahead.
Are they, Jim? Do you? Well, I don't want to speak for you. You agreed with me that what Hamas did on October 7th was evil incarnate, no doubt. Do you consider Hamas to be an evil entity? Yes or no?
Hamas what? Hamas's military wing, Hamas's leadership.
All of it. All of it.
All of it. Because listen, we could look at, say, the Republican Party here in the United States.
Careful.
Right? And you have clearly taken your stand. No, I'm saying this seriously.
I'm just kidding.
You've taken your stands and you're very clear about Donald Trump, and you're clear about the January 6th folks. So would you say then that, all Republicans are evil? Could there be just like rank and file people that are like, look, I like those guys. And this is me
Yeah.
hypothesizing,
Yeah.
right? Hey, I like those guys because the garbage got taken out, right? Or, hey, I like those guys. Someone might say, I like them because I feel like we live in an open air prison and they seem like to be the only group fighting for us,
So I
right?
think it's a good
I
point.
think,
I think it's helpful, Jim. You're right. It's helpful to distinguish the Hamas, the ruling regime of Gaza, their military wing and their government wing. The ruling regime is evil, just like I believe Iran's ruling regime is evil. I agree there are layers and levels below that of Palestinian people and even Hamas adjacent people who are not. But the people who rule with an iron fist and the military, that's evil. Jim, do you believe?
so
Go ahead, go
I
ahead,
guess
go
I would
ahead.
add, because I have a really hard time, and this is me as a theologian,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
I have a really hard time in categorically describing people who are God's creation as inherently evil,
I'm fascinated by that.
right? Because if that's the case, then there's no room for redemption, right? And this is the theological piece for me,
I know, I know.
right? So if I just say someone is evil and I categorize them and they're over here, well, evil then needs to be destroyed. Well, if for you and I as Catholics, if we bring the faith component into this, evil isn't to be destroyed. If it were, then Jesus would have used his power to destroy evil.
Well, he had
He
another
didn't.
purpose. Yeah.
He attempted to liberate, and he attempted to live love to the point that he was willing to die himself in the face of oppression, in the face of injustice, in the face of the structural issues that
Yeah.
created the moment where he got crucified. So this is the real challenge as a liberation theologian, right? This is where I do challenge my fellow Catholics, or in the broader sense, Christians, to ask these questions. Like, can we really look at another human being, if we believe that human being to have been created by God, and see them as pure evil? And if
Yes.
we do, then now I can look at them and say their actions are evil, their rhetoric is evil, right? And then the goal is to, can you transform, right? Now, maybe not. And if we were to turn to Thomas Aquinas, Aquinas would say in these kinds of situations that if you have someone that is acting out of pure evil, and and they're a threat to the community, then we have a right to, using his language, check the unjust aggressor, right? Which is a fancy way of saying, yes, you can kill that person
This
if
is
they are that much of a threat to the community.
And this is where Joe Walsh, the Catholic boy, probably falls off of the theologian ranch. I remember, Jim, a week or two after 9/11, when I attended Mass, our pastor asked the congregation, this was a week after 9/11, our pastor asked the congregation to pray for Osama bin Laden. Now, and by the way, you fascinate me, and I want to ask you what you would have done. I took my kids, little then, I stood up, I grabbed my kids, I shouted to the pastor, hell no, and I walked out of church. I understand what he was doing. I just vehemently disagree with it. The terrorists who did what they did on October 7th, I don't want to understand why they did what they did. I want them to pay. I want to understand the root causes to fix this thing eventually, but not those terrorists who butchered 1,400 of my civilians. They need to be defeated. Go ahead.
Yeah, and that's a fundamental ideological divide that you and I have. You want vengeance, and it's really, it's
Well, I would
we
say
look at
that's
this
a good.
from
Go ahead, Jim. No, go ahead. I
If we
interrupted
look
you.
at
Go
it from
ahead.
a Judeo-Christian framework, um, it's really the difference between the God of the Old Testament and Jesus of the New Testament, right? One is we see a lot of God seeking vengeance, and then we see Jesus kind of totally flipping the script
So what
and
would
saying, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. It's not an easy path, Joe.
No, James, I hear that.
Right?
I
It's
hear that,
not an
Jimmy.
easy path.
Agreed, and I appreciate it, and I so respect. By the way, you big jerk, I so respect your consistency. I mean that. I do. What would how would Jesus advise Israel to respond the day after October 7th? What would Jesus have told the good people of Israel to do?
Yeah.
Love thy
I
love
don't.
love that neighbor. But I see. I don't want to spend. This is fascinating. I
So,
don't want
so
to.
he actually, yeah. So no, but listen. Here's the thing. This is part of the challenge here. At the core of this, at the core of the challenges that we see in the Middle East, a lot of them are theological issues. And I don't know if we have enough people that are involved in the conversation who have adequate theological training to be able to have conversations that can bridge gaps, right?
So
And
yeah.
it's really really important. So
Let me.
yes, there are absolutely political issues, and here's the thing, when we say, wow, the kind of the trite cliche phrase, well, what would Jesus do? We can look to the texts and say, wow, what did he do? So here's Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. He knows they're coming for him. He knows if they come to
Yeah,
get him, right?
but
He's going to get taken away. There's going to be a kangaroo court, and he is going to be brutally
but
tortured and crucified. He knows that.
Jim Keady, I love you. Don't go down this road. He had a different
No,
mission. He had a different mission
but
on this earth.
but
I
Joe,
don't.
you asked me how he might advise them, and all I can do is look at the stories that we have, right? And in that situation where Jesus himself was about to face death unjustly, he was about to be tortured, he was about to be humiliated, and then hung on a dump between two criminals outside of the city as an example. And his boys wanted to defend him, right? And Peter pulls the sword and chops off a guy's ear. And what does Jesus say?
Yes,
Put the
agreed,
sword
agreed,
down.
agreed. I'm
Die, but man, that is a tough one to swallow.
right.
Right?
I'm gonna pull a timeout on my theologian friend. I hear what you're saying. This is a fascinating
Okay.
conversation. Um, uh, uh, Jesus had a specific mission, but I want to pivot because you said,
Go ahead.
and this will get us into the latter part of our discussion here. I want to pivot. You said, like I said, screw it. Those 14, they butchered 1,400 of my citizens, my civilians, men, women, and children.
Yep.
I'm not going to walk across into Gaza and embrace them and hug them and sit down with them and understand them, not them. And you said, well, then you're looking for vengeance. Great point. I want to pivot off of that because I also believe, James, that as long it's not just vengeance for me, as long as Hamas, a terrorist organization, pledged to the destruction of Israel, is Israel's neighbor, there will never be peace. So I want Hamas gone for peace. I want Hamas gone for the betterment of the Palestinian people. You may disagree with that, but that's a big part of my motivation. Respond to
Oh, look,
that.
I don't think Hamas is great for Palestinians as a governing body, nor as a military the military wing of
Yeah.
Hamas. I mean, look at what it has brought to the Palestinian people, right? And I don't think there will be peace if Israel continues to take land that is not theirs.
Whose land
I
is
don't
it?
think there will be peace if Israel continues to keep Palestinians in an open air prison. that, human rights groups, even within Israel, have described meets the definition of apartheid. Right? I don't think there will
Which I
be
disagree with, but
peace.
continue.
Yeah, I don't think there. In terms of the current moment, and then short term, mid range,
What?
long term, man, I don't think there's going to be. There's definitely not going to be peace if bombs continue to get dropped, which is why I believe we need a ceasefire. We need to get to the negotiating table, right? We need to ask who could serve as honest brokers here. I've offered, I think the Indonesians might be in a position to do it. And I also feel, and I've said this to you as we've messaged back and forth, and I've mentioned it publicly as well on my Twitter handle, that I think the Irish are very well positioned. Right. Another book that I encourage people to read is Say Nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Right. This is about the true. It's the true story of murder and memory in Northern Ireland. It's about the Troubles in Northern Ireland. You've got people, and it's not apples to apples, but there's enough there that there are some shared experiences where the Irish could say to the Palestinians and to the Israelis, yeah, we understand it. Yes, we know what it's like to lose a family member. Yes, I know what it's like to want revenge. And actually, I went and got it, and I can tell you that it didn't bring me what I thought it would. Right?
But you keep saying, Jim, you keep saying that.
Yeah.
Almost like you're tying Israel's hands, like revenge, like October 7th hit them. They shouldn't respond militarily because it's just revenge. I keep hearing that from you.
No. The question I'm asking is, right? I'm not saying it is. I'm asking, is this, right? One of the questions, if you and I are sitting in that room in D.C. and we get access to the military experts, and I would be asking, what is the best tactical approach to negate Hamas's ability to effectively launch attacks like they did on October 7th against the Israeli people? Is it, right? And you might, Joe, I could be wrong. We could sit down and there could be, we could have 20 of the top experts on this, and 18 of them could say, yeah, Jim, the way they're bombing the hell out of them right now and killing civilians and butchering children, yeah, when we've run the scenarios, when we game this out, that is the most effective tactical way to do this. My gut tells me it's not, and I'm open. And this is part of the challenge, right? And you know this better than I do, and I think we know it better than most people that are out there. Like, when you serve in office, whether you're serving in local office or you're serving at the congressional level, you get access to information, some of which you can't talk about.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And heavy is the head that wears the crown, where you've got to make decisions. And you're like, I think about times, and look, I'm a politico, as are you. And we're junkies for this stuff. And, well, if I was the president, I would have done this and I would have done, well, I try to look at it honestly and with humility and say, okay, I don't think these are evil people like who are serving in office. I may have fundamental disagreements with them. And they had 5 options put on their desk. And, man, they believe option number 3 is the worst of the best, or the best of the worst, rather.
Yeah.
Right?
And I've drilled down heavy on this, as I know you have in the last 3 weeks. No one has presented a compelling military alternative to what Israel is doing. Some people say,
has the question been asked, Joe? That's the frustration for me. I was listening to Brian Lehrer this morning on WNYC, and he had Congressman Himes on from Connecticut, Democrat from Connecticut, right? And Brian had said, and I agree with him, he's like, there's no debate. Like, the Congress, I mean, look, you've got you've got the AOC group, right? And generally speaking, the rest of the Congress is in lockstep behind everything Israel is doing or asking for. I would be standing.
By the way, for a couple reasons. That's a fact, Jim, for a couple reasons. One is political and financial. Another one is philosophical religious, every which way, standing by our closest ally against a terrorist organization pledged to its destruction. It's easier also philosophically to be on that side. It's not just money and pressure. It really isn't.
Yeah, I mean, I would be asking, if I were in the well, I would be asking these questions like, is this tactically the best approach? I haven't heard that question asked.
But see,
I have not heard that question asked. I would want a hearing. And I think the American people deserve this.
What,
yes, I want to
back up. Why? Wait a minute. I love you. But that's important for Congress to have that debate, but this isn't Congress's say. It's not Joe Biden's say. Israel was hit. Israel will decide what they're going to do.
Okay,
Israel.
Fine. Okay, Israel can, right? Yeah. But they're asking for our help. And I know that you are aware of the fact that Israel is not doing what they want to do without the full-throated backing of the United States. Because if Joe Biden wanted to, he could stop this tomorrow. Or Israel's on their own. And you go, hey, look, the question I would want to ask if I had that bully pulpit as a member of Congress, what's the line? Right? What is the line that Israel goes beyond where we go, whoa, hang on, boys. Right? You can't kill another 4,000 children. What is the line that like if you were if you're my friend and you're doing like at some point I've got to say out of love to you, dude, you got to stop.
I know that it's just and this will sound cold, but you are sophisticated enough about that region to know it. I don't mean it to be cold. It's not just purely like a numbers game, like 3,000 civilian Palestinians or 7,000, because this is a complex situation. We're talking about a terror group that over 17 years, Jim, made their civilian infrastructure and their terror infrastructure one and the same on purpose. They do use human shields. They do. Their headquarters, their command points, their munitions are underneath hospitals and schools and all the rest. They've done this for a long time. It's difficult to fight against that. I'll acknowledge it. But they've done this, and Israel has to deal with that.
Yeah. So again, I come back to, okay, how? And what's the best way to do it? I just fundamentally do not believe that using just the last 48 hours, bombing a refugee camp twice is moving the ball forward.
Why is there a first of all, refugee camp? Go ahead.
So when I look, Joe, when I look at the footage, right? So I'm in touch with a 23-year-old independent journalist on the ground in Gaza, right? And I see the footage that he's sharing. And there are other independent journalists that I've been following and seeing the footage that they're sharing. And a lot of it just raw, like, people being run into the hospital or pulled out of the rubble.
A lot of it isn't real.
Just lifeless. But okay, so let's say that you've got
a lot of it isn't.
Joe. So okay, let's say that you have that skepticism. Okay, so what I believe then we could, if we were in Congress, could demand of the president is to say bipartisan request. Yeah, we want independent journalists in there. We want as by the language that Biden's using. We want a humanitarian pause, and part of this pause is allowing, pick a number, 10 groups of independent journalists to go in and document what's going on, right? Because if we look at, the history of war and wars that the United States has, and my fear is we're going to get pulled into this, right, in a much more significant way than we are now and just offering money and weaponry and moral cover. If we look at the Vietnam War, the reason that the people who supported the Vietnam War, we know historically now, were wrong.
Oh, absolutely.
And one of the things that turned the American public was Dan Rather being in the field. right? Those independent journalists being in the field, showing you the carnage. People, where you say to me, hey, it's fake. Okay, who do you trust? Because let's get that journalist into the field.
Completely agree, and I'd be down with that. I'd be all good with that. The notion of a ceasefire and a humanitarian pause, though, look, Israel's got to do what they got to do. Now, Jim, I agree there's no military solution to peace in the Middle East. But I have not heard or read about a compelling military alternative to getting rid of Hamas. And that's what Israel is hell-bent on, I think rightly. And you can't go in with special ops and do this and that.
But
every military expert has said, Jim, every military expert
has said what?
That you cannot get rid of a 40 to 50 to 55,000 man Hamas army embedded within every nook and cranny and tunnel in that city with special ops. It may take you 85 years. History shows us that it's always bombing followed by on the ground.
So
I'll give you the final word on that, though.
Yeah. So I'm drawing a blank on her name right now, but I had shared, like, part of the reason this conversation came about was I was like, you should get this woman on, professor from, I watched her do a talk at Washington University, like an expert on terrorism, and she kind of lays out that there are, in her academic analysis of this, her strategic analysis of it as a defense expert, there are like 6 different paths to ending a terrorist regime's power, right? Mm-hmm. And I would want to be asking the question, like, I want to ask the question, are we on one of those paths? If we were to analyze Hamas, right, and I would be looking to an expert like that, okay, let's get an analysis of Hamas, and based on your experience, if we're looking at these 6 pathways, what's the best pathway to take, right? And this is where it takes restraint and it takes courage to say, yes, we don't need to act with overwhelming force immediately, because it may not be the best course of action. And we know this from our own experience in 2 failed adventures in Afghanistan and in Iraq. Well, massive amounts of blood and treasure.
Agreed.
And I'm not sure if in the long term that those have made us any safer. And I look at, and this is me, and I'm no expert, Joe, right? All the footage that I'm watching that I believe to be real from the contacts that I have, I'm watching these kids. I'm watching these young fathers, and I'm just going, there's another radical. He was just radicalized.
Agreed. By the way, you don't. Hamas on October 7th purposely targeted civilians to kill. You don't believe right now that Israel is purposely targeting civilians to kill, do you?
This was the dance that Congressman Himes was making this morning, right? He was saying that, there's a difference between, what was the language he was using? But, he was saying, well, Hamas intentionally targeted civilians.
Which they did.
Israel is not. Well, here's the thing. If we're using common sense and we're talking straight like you like to talk, you're going to drop a bomb on that refugee camp, then you intentionally know you're about to kill civilians.
Well,
and you can come up with all the moral gymnastics that you want to. You're killing civilians by dropping incendiary bombs on that particular location.
First of all,
they know it. They may say, hey, that's collateral damage, and we're willing to accept that. They may be making that case. But to say that, we don't intend it to happen.
You don't make a distinction, though, do you? You don't see a distinction there. Israel targeting Hamas's compound, which, by the way, is where that where those two blasts went down below, targeting the compound where, by the way, Hamas stored all their munitions, which went off, which, by the way, killed a lot of Palestinian people. They did not target the civilians above ground. They hit underground and the thing collapsed. There's a difference there, James.
Yeah. So what provisions were made to get the civilians out of there before they dropped?
Can I give you one? I'll give you one. 3 weeks ago, Israel gave a 24-hour warning. Everybody get out of North Gaza within 24 hours. And they did that 3 weeks ago.
You've been to New York City, right?
Gaza is not New York City.
Yeah, agreed. Even worse infrastructure, no public transportation, right? Move 2 million people. Have you ever worked in a refugee camp? I have.
Jim,
I know what it's like with 3,000 people on a given day and what a nightmare it is.
Over 900,000 Gazans is the number I've looked at, evacuated within about a week and a half.
Okay, but that's not 24 hours, like you said.
No. But Jim, that's my point.
What provision, and you look at this and go, well, where are they supposed to go? Right?
South.
And this is where my experience. Okay, Joe, you say go south.
Go south.
But this is my experience of having worked in refugee camps. Okay, you go south. Just things that you don't necessarily think about if you haven't worked in that kind of theater before, right? Well, they're going south. Great. Where are they getting water? Where are they getting food? Where are they going to the bathroom?
Let's open Egypt. Let's open Egypt up. Egypt should embrace them. Look, Jim,
Egypt doesn't want to. Joe, Egypt doesn't want to open up.
Of course they don't.
Because, in large part, because they have a concern that and you may not believe this.
I don't.
Listen, I'm no fan of Egypt's got their issues.
Or Jordan.
Right? That's another conversation to have.
Yeah.
But one of their concerns that I think is valid is if we open the gates and we have 1.5 million, even all of them, 2 million Palestinian civilians go into the Sinai Peninsula and we set up refugee camps for them, that they're never going to be allowed to go back to the land, to the property that is rightfully theirs. And I have to believe that you can honestly admit that there are people within the Likud party, Netanyahu, I would put right in front with them, leading them, who have that ideological and tactical belief system and actions that, they want to empty Gaza. So the Palestinians will be gone, and it will be theirs from the river to the sea.
Hey, Jim, I will bet you drinks at your bar, your tavern, for the rest of your life.
I'll buy you the whole bottle of tequila.
No, when this is all done, Israel will lead the effort to rebuild Gaza. But just that one point. When Israel said you got 24 hours to get lost, of course they couldn't do that. Go south. But Israel knew that. That was 3 weeks ago.
But there's still nowhere to go.
But Jim, if they had all gone to the south in Gaza, all of them, the pressure on Egypt to open up, Israel's not touching the south of Gaza. Egypt, Jordan, all these Arab countries don't want these Palestinians. That's been patently clear. They love the fact that that Gaza is a pain up Israel's ass. They use it that way. I want to close with this. You and I need to close. Now I'll give you the first word. And this is a great conversation. You've been wonderful. Pull back now from the current conflict. What's the biggest obstacle to peace in that region? Go.
Yeah. So I'll give you an anecdotal story. When I was running, as I mentioned earlier, when I was running for the state assembly in 2015, I met with the New Jersey State Democratic Jewish Caucus.
Yeah.
And I listened to what their concerns were, what they were looking for from assembly people. And I had critical questions, similar, it clearly wasn't what we're talking about tonight, but critical questions about the rights of Palestinians and just the dynamics of the region. The conversation did not go well, right? So the big group broke, and then it was just 6 of us talking. And that got even more heated. And I said, hang on, can we pause for a second? I said, trying to find some really basic common ground. I said to these 6 individuals that I was talking to, all Jewish Americans living in New Jersey, I said, can you tell me one positive thing about the Palestinian people? Dead silence. And I waited. Right now, in fairness, I'm going to bet that if I had had a similar conversation with Palestinian activists and I asked, tell me one positive thing about Jewish people or Israelis, that I might be met with equal silence.
So then translate that for me. What's the biggest obstacle to peace in that region?
So when that had such a profound impact on me, and I was like, my God, just things that come to mind for me. Like, let's say that you and I were just vicious enemies, right?
Yeah.
I still might be like, well, look, Joe loves his kids, right? Joe's passionate about his faith and what he believes in.
Completely.
If I can't find one shard of positivity that can capture the slightest piece of your human dignity, then I don't none of this that I've gotten all written out notes in front of me and books to my left and the conversation that you and I just had. Man, I don't know. I don't know where we go from there. So it's why, there's a Jesuit priest who I've been in contact with. I was going to go to Gaza. I was trying to go there and started making plans before any of this. And then COVID hit and it just put the kibosh on everything. But this Jesuit priest that I was talking to over there who, lives in Israel and goes back and forth and does a lot of work bringing Palestinian and Israeli kids together.
Completely. I get it. I'm gonna give you my single biggest obstacle to peace, and then I'm gonna give you the final word to respond to it.
Yeah.
You have 2 groups of people who historically have a claim to a piece of land.
Yep.
They've argued over that piece of land. You have now 2 neighbors living side by side, basically at war with each other for, we'll just say, the last 75 years. The biggest obstacle, Jim Keady, to peace is, and we need to understand why they feel this way, but the biggest obstacle to peace is, of those 2 neighbors right now, one of those neighbors, Hamas, Hezbollah, Islamists, Israel's enemies, one of those neighbors, Jim, does not believe the other neighbor has a right to exist. It's in their dang charter. As long as one neighbor, Jim Keady, I'm going to give you the final word, as long as one neighbor doesn't even believe the other neighbor has a right to exist, you can never have peace. So as long as that neighbor believes that, there's no peace. I would say the ultimate solution is moderate Arabs and Muslims in the region need to team up with Israel and go after these people, Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, and the rest, who don't believe Israel has a right to exist. If Hamas would, and the rest of them would just say, okay, fuck it. We've been arguing over this piece of land for a gazillion years. Israel, you got a right to exist. Now, can we sit down and figure shit out? They'd sit down and figure shit out. But as long as they don't say Israel's got a right to exist, forget it. I'll give you the final word, my friend.
Yeah, but I don't think that you're looking at the hardcore folks on the other side of this, the Jewish nationalists, the Zionists, who believe that all of this belongs to them, and they've been taking it by force, both in the occupied territories, right? And then because they haven't been able to take Gaza, they have isolated it as an open air prison. So there has to be an honest accounting on.
By the way, you just made me think of one more question I want to ask you. So 2005, Israel gets the hell out of Gaza. It's yours. It's yours. We leave Gaza.
Yeah.
2006, Hamas is elected. 2007, here comes the barricade. What's the word? Help me. Barricade, not barricade.
Blockade.
The blockade that both Egypt and Israel put on Gaza, because here comes a terrorist organization that's going to do bad shit. Once Israel left Gaza, Jim, in 2005, Hamas or whoever, they could have turned Gaza into Israel, into a beautiful piece of land. Why didn't they?
Well, yes, maybe.
Maybe.
And I think those are similar arguments that people make about Cuba, right? And you go, well, who could they have traded with, right? And were they allowed to just kind of freely do their thing? I mean, and I just think there's a lot of moving parts here that, and it's sad, right? Because
I can hear that.
there's a lot of pain on both sides. There are families that are literally being blown apart.
Yeah.
You know, and I get so frustrated with at times the cavalier nature of some of our fellow Americans and the way that they talk about this stuff. They got to turn the whole place into glass. Really? Like, do you understand what that means? They got to kill them all. Like, where is the humanity in that?
Agreed.
Where's our conscience? Where's our moral compass?
Agreed.
And we could say, well, they did this. Well, if we believe ourselves to be morally on the higher ground, does that mean we have to act differently? Right? And it may mean that you know, some actions may not seem aligned with getting what some people call justice, and as we've talked about, I would argue at times it's just vengeance. Right?
I hear you, brother.
It's.
Well, hey,
I feel like, and it's not just this issue, and Joe, you know this more than I do because you were in the belly of that beast.
Yeah.
We're at a point in this American experiment where our elected officials have become the lines are drawn so hard, the calcification is so deep. This stuff is complex. You can't solve it with an internet meme and a quick 1-2 punch on Twitter, right? This is 5-dimensional chess, and I have a deep concern. You know, you'd mentioned that, and I think it's a critical point where you said, you know, trying to get other Muslim nations in the region to recognize Israel's right to exist. And this is why I think Hamas, in part, did what they did.
Sure,
Saudi Arabia was moving in that direction.
And this is why they did what they did.
And I believe Hamas said, we have to stop this and force the hand here. And and now you've got you've got Hezbollah, who has just entered the fray in a more significant way, and they're going to make a statement tomorrow, I think at 3:00 local time, about what their intentions are. You've got the Houthis, right? And these are both, the invisible hand behind both of them is Iran.
Yeah.
Right? Are we one errant rocket from either direction being fired that then draws the United States into it? Does Russia, who's been a friend of Palestine and negotiates with them on a range of issues and recognizes them, does Russia then enter this on a second front? And how does it all play out? And man, you look at like World War II. If you're a student of history, look at World War II and World War I, and not just the dates and the names and the locations in a history book, but how did this unfold? How did it get to this point of madness? And we're watching it. And that's why I do appreciate you having me on and really trying to slow things down and go, we may have some real significant ideological and tactical disagreements, but man, we got to hear each other out, because World War III is nuclear.
Right. I want to I want to close by saying a couple things. It's why a big part of why I appreciate you, because you are real, genuine, and compassionate, and I know and I hear that in you, and I hear this when you talk about any issue. There is a difference between Islam and Islamism. And maybe we're at a point where the moderate Arab and Muslim countries and people will finally stand up against the Islamist, the terrorist, because I just don't think there's never going to be peace unless Hamas and those people are gone.
I think within the Jewish community, and there are a lot of voices out there. I mean, Jewish Voices for Peace is one of the lead organizations that is mobilizing people along this. Is maybe we also need moderate voices within the Jewish community, because Netanyahu's not moderate. Right,
right.
He's a Jewish.
I'm gonna slap you upside the head, but I want you to give me an honest answer. As much as you and I may not like Netanyahu, there's zero moral equivalence between a Netanyahu and an Islamic terrorist who would rape, butcher, and blow up a civilian. Correct or not?
Yeah, Joe. For you and I, but if you were to talk to Palestinians who have been displaced from their homes, had their homes taken away, have had their family members thrown in prison with no charges, have had their family members tortured or disappeared, they might say something different.
I agree.
Where I also feel we have had for decades a tremendous imbalance of information and dialogue on the issues between Israel and Palestine, where we in the United States, and particularly in our Congress, have been flooded and dominated, right, on this particular issue, historically, by the likes of AIPAC, by hardcore Zionists, right? And the difficulty is me even saying that we've been dominated by AIPAC and Zionists. Well, you're going to have people who hear this and go, Jim's an anti-Semite. So how do you critique those organizations in a fair way? Because I do think that their ideology is problematic. I think their political praxis is dangerous. I think they have in part created the dynamics that they face on a regular basis.
Having been there, respectfully disagree. I think the reason this country, reflected by our Congress, is so much more pro-Israel than pro-Islamist is because Israel is our closest ally, because Israel is closer to us philosophically and morally.
But think about what you just did there.
I did it on purpose.
You took a country of Israel, right, on one side, and then you are saying, and this is where the rhetoric is dangerous.
What?
You said the Islamists, and people are going to hear that.
Well,
you may not have meant it this way, as Islamic. Well, who are we talking about?
No.
Are you talking about the Islams in Indonesia?
No.
Are you talking about the Islams in Jordan? Are you talking about the Islams in Egypt? Are you talking about
Jim?
The Muslims, rather?
No, that's a great point, because sometimes I'll get hit over the head with that. You understand, but the average person doesn't understand the difference between Islam, a religion. The vast majority of Muslims want to get along with everybody on the planet, just like the vast majority of Catholics do. Islamists is a whole distinct another political ideology that believes Islam should rule the world. That's something different. That's what I'm referring to, Jim. That's all.
And which ones are we talking about? Are we talking about Wahhabists? Or and again, this is where, and I think to kind of put a button on this, because we could go on for another hour or two. I'm looking at my notes here and looking at, point number one I asked if we could agree to as we started the conversation was we're not going to solve this today.
Hey, right? I want to, and so that makes me want to close with this. I love Jim Keady. And I want everybody to follow him on Twitter at JW Keady, at JW I appreciate you because you are what this country needs, even if you and I disagree on damn near everything. You are genuine, you are sincere, you are compassionate, you are empathetic, and you are reasoned. I'd love to see you in Congress. I thank you for taking the time to have this conversation with me. We will do it again. But everybody follow Jim. And if you're in New Jersey, kick this guy in the ass and make him run for Congress again. James, thank you, my friend.
All right, Joe. I appreciate it. I really enjoyed the conversation, man. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for listening. Remember to listen, share, and follow White Flag with Joe Walsh on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere great podcasts are found. And be sure to leave a 5-star review. This has been White Flag with Joe Walsh.